What do modern Westerners think of history? How does the Quran treat the past? What is the day of last? How does the Quran treat the future? Define al-akhirah. It's relatively easy when studying an ancient people to imagine that they just have different information in their heads. We know about space travel, antibiotics, and the internet, and they did not. Generally, when Western people today look at the past, it's with a certain fascination, but also a bit of condescension. Even if we don't think it consciously, we tend to assume that we are smarter, more moral, and more complicated than pre-modern people. To us, even the words ancient or antique carry a sense of being out of date, over. Medieval or primal smacks of barbarism or backwardness. But that isn't a typical way to think of history. In fact, there is no typical way of thinking of history. Our culture, like all cultures, has particular ways to think about things that seem like common sense, but are actually determined by our environment and upbringing. Take the notion of progress. Progress is pretty typical of most Western conceptions of history. In short, progress is the assumption that there is a singular direction in which history moves, and that as things pass into the future, they generally get better. Time moves on. Things develop. They evolve. When we hear phrases like that, we instinctively think of them in a positive light. Change is good. Development is good. Evolution is good. But those kind of statements are not demonstrable. Is there some way to demonstrate that, for instance, people are happier now than they have been in the past? Are people always more happy than their own ancestors? Across all history as a rule? How could we even prove that? Well, if we want, we can try to lock on to particular cases of progress, but even these are easily knocked down. Moderns tend to have two special cases which they consider to be true progress: human rights and technology. While the quality of life, that is, that stuff that's promised by human rights, may be better for some people today than their ancestors, there are certain cases where this is not true in the slightest. After all, the 20th century was significantly more bloody and genocidal than the 19th century. And the 19th century was more bloody and genocidal than the 18th century. So, if humans on the whole are getting better at human rights, the numbers paint a very different story. Technology is the same. We can say pretty easily that we have some technological powers now that our forebears couldn't even dream of. Some of them, like modern forms of medicine or instantaneous global communication, certainly seem better than what pre-modern people had to work with. But we can also find technological developments that are unquestionably negative. Climate change, environmental collapse, mass extinctions. These are entirely recent phenomena, and they are the direct products of our sciences and technologies. And there have been many examples throughout history of technologies and science being forgotten, only to be rediscovered later. The ancient Romans knew how to make cement and stained glass, while their Western European medieval descendants didn't. those technologies were lost and rediscovered centuries later. Why can't that sort of thing happen again? In fact, isn't that sort of thing certainly going to happen again sooner or later? Sorry to get so glum, but it's important to understand that Western conceptions of historical progress are not factually sustainable. However, that's not to say that they're useless. Not at all. They are the stories that we tell about ourselves. They tell us who we hope to be. Progress helps us to see the future optimistically, but that isn't the default setting for the human mind. Thinking of history as progress is as culturally specific to our civilization as pop music and smartphones. It's just one more facet of our culture, how our culture works whether we like it or not. It shouldn't be too shocking then that other people who are not modern Westerners have had different understandings of what history is and means. Not all cultures think of history the same way. For example, some see the best of times in the past, not the future. When people speak of golden ages, they are saying that things used to be better and now have gotten worse. Other people see history as cyclical. Rather than moving ever forward into the future, time recycles itself, with human life, or even the life of the whole universe, constantly ending and starting again. And yet other people are apocalyptic. They see their own moment in time as particularly broken and deficient, for whatever reason, and that any moment now there'll be some kind of simultaneously horrible and yet wonderful cataclysm that will at once expose how bad everything is, and yet also fix it. So when we look to Muslims across time and around the world, most of whom are not modern Westerners, we'll find quite a number of different understandings of what history is all about to them. For the next few discussions, we'll take a look at just a few of them. Let's start with the Quran. In this case, though, not because the Quran claims to be a revelation from God, but rather because the Quran is the first artifact of Islam to speak of. That is to say, not only does the Quran carry forward through Islamic history as an object of adoration, study, and meditation, it serves as a testimony to the very first Ummah. What did they think of the world around them? Because these first Muslims, or proto-Muslims, accepted the Quran, we have to assume that it spoke to them and to their visions of themselves. So what does the Quran have to say about the past? What does the Quran, and by extension, the first Ummah, think history is? When the Quran discusses history, it does so in two different registers. There is a primeval past, when God made the world, and what we're going to call here a prophetic past, which is the history of the human race. First, we're going to start with the most ancient past, which is the origin point of history itself. When the Quran speaks of the beginning of things, it seems to jump into a kind of time outside of time. While the Quran catalogs lots of events at the dawn of history, they don't seem to have any clear order where this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. The creation of the world and the human race, according to the Quran, all collectively happens in a sort of foggy before time. The Quran never mentions what God was doing before the world came into being. However, it does, on several occasions, mention that God made the world over a course of 6 days. And surely we created the heavens and the earth and what is between them in 6 days, and no tiredness touched us. The Quran doesn't dwell on this matter too much, presumably because the late antique audience already knew about these 6 days. Ancient Jews and ancient Christians alike both claimed that God made the world in 6 days. So, regarding this matter, the Quran is simply confirming what they thought already. Where the Quran seems to present some new information is in the specifics of that creation. For instance, at some point in this time before time, God creates the first human, Adam. Then, from Adam, or perhaps from his children, God somehow summons forth the entire future human race and asks them who their God is. And remember when your Lord took from the children of Adam, from their loins, their descendants, and made them testify of themselves. Am I not your Lord? They said, yes, we have testified. Again, when exactly is this supposed to have happened is immaterial. At some point in the primordial past, God called forth all the descendants of Adam, that is, the whole human race throughout all of history, and asked them, am I not your Lord? And they agree to this question. Yes, they have all promised that God is their maker and master. This event is called the Covenant, or Day of Elast, after the question in Arabic, Alastu bi Rabbikum? Am I not your Lord? This Covenant of Elast, or Day of Elast, marks the beginning of a promise between God and the whole human race. No one can claim that they're ignorant of God or owe God nothing. We all made this pact in the beginning of time. Also, at some point, God teaches Adam the names, although how we're to understand the names isn't that clear. And he taught Adam the names, all of them. Then he showed them to the angels and said, inform me of the names of these, if you are truthful. They said, exalted are you. We have no knowledge except what you taught us. Indeed, it is you who is the knowing, the wise. So what are the names? Well, frankly, it's not spelled out for us. Does it refer to the names of all the creatures that God made? As in, the human race has a unique ability to use language and give names to whatever they see? Possibly. Does it refer to the most beautiful names of God? As in, the human race alone can call on God using God's own proper names and attributes? Maybe. We don't know. But what is certain is that humans are somehow doubly set apart. They have made a covenant with God on the Day of Elast, and they have some kind of unique knowledge that is withheld from even the angels. Then comes the fall of Adam and his wife, who's unnamed in the Quran, but is traditionally called Hawa, Eve. And we said, O Adam, dwell in the garden, you and your wife, and eat from it in abundance from anywhere you will. But do not approach this tree, or you will be among the losers. But Satan caused them to falter and removed them from that state in which they had been. And we said, go down, all of you, as enemies to one another, and you will have upon the earth a place of settlement and provision for a time. Whether you're Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, this story should sound very familiar. Adam and Eve are living happily in paradise, free to eat and do whatever they want, with only one rule: don't go near the specific tree. But Satan tricks them, and then the three of them, Adam, Eve, and Satan, are expelled from the garden and go to live down on the earth. And from here, we move into the second kind of past the Quran discusses, what we're going to call the prophetic history. Now, the Quran jumps from a kind of prehistory into a cycle of time marked by particular repeating events. First, people behave wickedly, either by committing shirk or by being otherwise immoral in some sense. Then, God sends this people one of their own as a prophet. This prophet tries to warn their people to turn back to God, but most of them don't listen. The prophet is then mocked and persecuted, but then God vindicates the prophet and their followers by sparing them from some kind of destruction that annihilates the evildoers. Then time passes, and the cycle repeats itself. People are evil, God sends a prophet, the prophet is attacked, evil people are punished, and so on, and on, and on, for all history from Adam until the present. Here, for instance, is the story of a prophet named Salih, who is sent to his people called Thamud. And to Thamud was sent their brother Salih. He said, "My people, worship God, you have no God but him." They said, "Salih, before this you were a man of promise. Do you forbid us to worship what our forefathers worshipped?" So when our command came, we saved Salih and those who believed along with him from the shame of that day by mercy from us. Indeed, it is your Lord who is the powerful, the Almighty. And the scream seized those who had done wrong, and they fell in their homes. So the people of Thamud were sent the prophet Salih. He tells them to accept no God but God, and stop just doing what their ancestors did, that is, worshiping other gods. But the people mostly say no, and they mock Salih. Then God sends forth some kind of plague like a scream that strikes down the people but spares Salih and those who followed him. So people are evil, God sends a prophet, the prophet is attacked, and the evil people are punished. Now let's meet another Quranic prophet, Hud, and his people, Ad. This story should sound a little familiar. And to Ad was sent their brother, Hud. He said, "My people worship God, you have no God but him." They said, "Hud, you have not brought us clear proof. We are not ones who will leave our gods on your word. We only say that a few of our gods have possessed you with evil." So when our command came, we saved Hud and those who believed along with him from a severe punishment by mercy from us. And that was Ad, who rejected the signs of their Lord and disobeyed his messengers and followed the order of every stubborn tyrant. And so they were followed in this world and on the day of resurrection with a curse. So to the people of Ad was sent the prophet Hud. He tells them to accept no God but God, stop worshipping other gods. But the people mostly say no, and suggest that some gods must have cursed Salih. But the true God sends forth a curse of his own on the people of Ad, sparing Hud and his believers. See? People are evil, God sends a prophet, the prophet is attacked, and evil people are punished. Notice the pattern? The prophetic history of the Quran keeps playing out like this over and over again. Bad people, persecuted prophets, divine destruction. Bad people, persecuted prophets, divine destruction. So the prehistory of the world, which is a time outside of time, gives way to this, the human condition. But quite unlike our notion of history in the modern West, the Quran's vision of human history is entirely without progress. In fact, the defining feature of the Quranic vision of the past is that there's something perpetual about it. People don't change. They were stubborn 100 years ago, and they were stubborn 1,000 years ago. The timeless state of Adam, the progenitor of all humans, who at once knows something special and yet is disobedient, carries forward into his children and his children's children in an unending hoop of sin, reminder, and punishment. Unlike modern Western notions of the past, in which history is something to be overcome, the Quran asks its audience to look around and try to learn from history. In the primeval past, people agreed to call God their Lord, but they ignored their own promises and the warnings of the prophets. Look around, the Quran says, the evidence of this is everywhere. What? Haven't they traveled the earth and considered the end of those who came before? Their messengers came to them with clarifying proof, and God would never wrong them, but they wronged themselves. Many ways of life have passed away before you, so travel the earth and consider the ends of those who cried lies. We destroyed many generations before you when they sinned, and their messengers came to them with the clarifying proof, but they would not have faith. Or do you think that you will enter the garden without suffering like those who passed away before you? They were touched by poverty and hardship, and were disturbed until even their messenger and those who believed with him said, "When is God's help coming?" For certain, the help of God is nearby. In short, quite unlike modern Western history, Quranic history has no notion of progress. The human animal is static, and so human history is static. While the Quran does have a notion of Jahiliyyah, that there was once an age of ignorance in the immediate past, it doesn't think that this state defines history itself. Jahiliyyah is just the Arab world before the time of Muhammad, which was particularly corrupt and ignorant. But every people will struggle. It is incumbent on the human being because shirk is written into human nature. And so this cycle of history continues on and on. Disobedience and forgetfulness grows. A new prophet arrives who builds a new community. The wicked are destroyed. And repeat. This process goes on until the end of times. That is, the hour, the return, or the day of repayment. That is when the old order of history is overturned and a new order is unveiled. This is called al-akhirah, the other world, the afterlife. The thing that happens after this world has run its course. Again, like the Quran's primordial history, the chronology of the akhirah is not entirely discernible, most especially concerning the when part. But some signs, events, and figures of the akhirah are mentioned with relative clarity, notably disturbances in nature. On the day that the earth shall be changed into a different earth, and so too the heavens, and they shall come forth before God, the One, the Almighty. The heavens and the earth will be broken apart. The sky will rip open. The oceans swell. The earth will be unrolled and flattened like a scroll, and then the mountains will blow away like tufts of wool on the breeze. The sun, the moon, and the stars will all go out. The earth will shake violently and begin to spew up her contents. There are some other cataclysmic events mentioned too, but these are a little less coherent in any straightforward sense. There's one passing reference to some kind of apocalyptic monster which will tell people that they've been disobedient to God. When the word falls on them, we shall bring forth out of the earth a creature that will say to them that people had no faith in our signs. Similar passages are found in Jewish and Christian literatures, so perhaps the audience is expected to know what this creature is already. Likewise, the tribes of Gog and Magog, Yajuj wa Majuj in Arabic, which similarly are common features of Jewish and Christian apocalyptic tales, are unleashed upon the world. When Gog and Magog are unloosed, and they slide down out of every slope, and the true promise draws near, then the eyes of the unbelievers will stare. Woe to us! We were heedless of this. No, we were sinners. At some point, a horn or a trumpet will be blown twice, which will resurrect the dead and will also gather the now living dead into one place together. The Quranic resurrection often has this almost shepherd-like imagery of people being herded together like livestock and then arranged in lines. And the trumpet will be blown, and we will gather them all together. Then the last judgment will begin. There are two elements that are often mentioned. First, there is a book or books that the resurrected dead will read themselves, and this or these texts will detail all of the people's sins and virtues. And the book shall be put in place. Then you shall see the guilty fearing from what is in it. They will say, "Oh, woe on us! What is this book? It does not omit anything small or great, but numbers them all. What they did they shall find present, and your Lord does not deal unjustly with anyone." There will also be a scale, a mizan, which will notice every human deed, even if it weighs no more than a grain of mustard seed. And while God will fall on the side of mercy and compassion, he seems to show no tolerance for shirk. Surely God does not forgive associating anything with him. The Akhirah, the end of days as described by the Quran, is famously dramatic, and they're referenced somehow in nearly every surah of the text. And this makes a kind of schematic sense. Since the history of this world is marked by immobility and a kind of repetitive consistency, it follows, naturally, that this vision of history must end with drama and tumult. The more over the top the end of times is, the more the stasis of these times is underscored. In the Quranic world, the shock of the final day of resurrection and judgment reminds the listener that history as we understand it now is shockingly without progress or change. What do modern Westerners think of history? How does the Quran treat the past? What is the day of the last? How does the Quran treat the future? Define al-akhirah